The Black Hole, a novel by Alan Dean Foster. Chapter 10. Vincent drifted silently alongside Bob. Both machines traveled as slowly as possible, so as to minimize the noise produced by their repellers. Bob's tended to grind from time to time. Vincent was going to see the evidence that would confirm Bob's incredible revelation. The older robot had insisted, so that no doubt would be left in the minds of Vincent's human crewmates. They slowed to a halt by a closed door. Bob repeated the admonition for silence, then activated the door. It slid back soundlessly. They drifted into a large room. Bob reclosed the door behind them. They were gazing into a roughly circular chamber lit by many colored lights. Deeper lights, powerful precision lasers, were firing down at a cylindrical platform. The platform turned slowly as the lights played upon it. Several humanoid robots were working at nearby consoles or over the round table. When they moved, Vincent caught a glimpse of their stations. Computer consoles of the most intricate design. As the platform table continued to revolve, the watching robots had a clear view of what rested atop it. Several humanoid shapes lay within indentations in the platform. Their heads were the same as those of the humanoids operating the instrumentation, but the bodies lying in the indentations were not. Vincent's sensors informed him that they were not, as he had hoped, superb replicas of human forms. They were human forms. What lay behind the mirrored faceplates that covered each skull he preferred not to speculate on. Lasers flashed at regular intervals, and other devices functioned. All were conducted by the robed, face-plated shapes at the consoles. It was a compact symphony of remote surgery, advanced cybernetics, and complete moral desiccation. "These poor creatures are what's left of the original human crew," Bob whispered as softly as he could. "They are kept alive by a technique of Reinhardt's I don't pretend to understand." "They are humans, then?" "More robot now than human, Vincent." The old robot sounded forlorn. "There was nothing a mere Bob unit like myself could have done. Reinhardt had constructed Maximilian as a therapeutic research project, or so he told the other humans. With Maximilian's aid, he was able to take over the ship. He and Maximilian had secretly reprogrammed the other robots to help him. They were not responsible. He'd altered their circuitry and memories radically. This altered programming did not manifest itself until the time he'd chosen for the takeover, when their secret spatial programming was keyed by a selected phrase spoken only by Reinhardt. Those humans who survived, you see what's left of them working around the ship. Occasionally some died despite the best efforts of Reinhardt's programmed surgeons. Some died from natural causes, I'm sure, but I believe others experienced a flash of reality and killed themselves." "Only a flash? Couldn't some of them," Vincent asked hopefully, "still retain enough to be returned to a normal state?" "I doubt it," Bob said sadly. "Their brains have been altered to do Reinhardt's bidding. They retain no individual will, react to nothing save the task they are assigned to. When I was able to isolate myself with one I tried to communicate, none has ever responded to me." "How come you weren't reprogrammed by Reinhardt along with all the other robots?" "It was through no cleverness of my own, but for an accident of circumstance. I would be as obedient as any you have encountered. You see, I was lying dormant in the back of the maintenance area when Reinhardt reprogrammed the robots in my section of the ship. My task was originally performed by humans, so I may not have been on any of his lists. I was reactivated several days after the humans had been killed, or brought here to be altered. By that time, Reinhardt was in complete command of the Cygnus. He was too occupied with other tasks to consider that he might have missed one potentially uncooperative robot. I've taken care not to draw attention to my independent nature. Regardless, he would have been right not to be concerned. A single unreprogrammed mechanical or two could be no threat to him, not with the sentries already under his command and Maximilian to do his bidding. There was no aura of vengeance to Bob's words. Such extreme memory emotions were denied mechanicals, but Vincent thought he could detect a certain dissatisfaction. "There must be something," he began. The door opened behind them. 2 sentry robots stood there. A rapid display of lights raced across their external monitoring units as they reacted to the presence of Vincent and Bob in the restricted area. "They must know I've told you," Bob said hurriedly. "Your presence alongside me's enough. We're done for. Get down." Bob cut his repellers and fell almost to the deck as the sentries' weapons rose to firing position. Before either could shoot, Vincent's own lasers flared several times. Both sentries were knocked back into the anteroom, clear of the surgery. They spewed droplets of liquid metal and sparking internal modules. Oblivious to anything not directly affecting their designated task, the humanoid surgeons continued operating. Vincent led Bob through the now open door, closed it quickly behind them. They concealed the 2 punctured metal shapes as best they could, then started up the corridor. Perhaps when this new information was laid before him, Captain Holland would initiate action somewhat more compelling than conversation. Durant paced the dining room, ignoring the food and the view outside. How to make them believe, he thought frantically. How to show them the importance of Reinhardt and what he proposed to attempt. So far, Dan and Harry had offered nothing against the commander except groundless suspicions. He had to convince them. "What's wrong with you people?" his frustration poured out. "The man has given us our lives. Or have you already forgotten that his generosity is enabling us to repair the Palomino? Or that once he was sure we meant him no harm," and he glared accusingly at Booth. "He's been a perfect host. More than that, he's offered to let us take back to Earth details of his fantastic accomplishments and discoveries, knowing he can never be certain we'll see he receives proper credit for them." Holland looked sympathetic, but still said what had to be said. "That doesn't obviate the fact that he's technically a pirate operating a stolen ship, Alex." "We don't know that!" Durant slammed a fist on the table, rattling crystalware and spilling gravy on the immaculate imitation-laced tablecloth. "He says the others abandoned ship and tried to return home. They may still be on their way if they have trouble with their superlight engines." "I think we have enough evidence to believe otherwise, Alex." "Circumstantial, Dan, only circumstantial. I've seen no reason to think that—" Holland interrupted him. "I've seen enough evidence to make me worry, both about the actual fate of the missing crew and about Reinhardt's state of mind." "Don't be so blasted superior. Men like Reinhardt are a special breed. They push back the frontiers of human knowledge. Sure, that can be a little unsettling at times." Holland gave him a long look. "You mean one set of rules for those pushing back the frontiers and another for those of us who simply want to live with them?" "Don't put words in my mouth. Where would we be without men like Reinhardt?" "Healthier," said Pizer. "I'm not anti-research, Alex, you know that. Only against uncontrolled research, like uncontrolled fusion. You can get burned both ways." "Reinhardt says he's checked everything." "Charlie doesn't mean that," Holland explained. "Science needs a system of checks and balances, just like law. Here, Reinhardt is both." He shook his head slowly. "In my book, that's research without control. It's Reinhardt's other activities that worry me most, not this intended suicidal plunge into the black hole." "Other activities?" Durant's brows drew together. "What are you talking about, Dan?" Reinhardt waited expectantly, watching the doorway opposite. The probe ship, now docked, rested nearby. The door leading from the umbilical passageway opened. Quietly, the humanoid pilot of the probe joined them. Reinhardt looked him over, then said impassively, "Maximilian will take you to the briefing. I want to check out personally your ship's instrumentation and the information you recorded." He stepped past the pilot. The pilot did not acknowledge the movement. He waited somnolently until Maximilian closed the door leading to the ship. Together, the two machines began the passage by cylinder. Vincent noted with relief the two destroyed sentries could not be seen from the upper end of the corridor. His careful snipping of circuitry and module links had rendered their communications systems inoperative, should they somehow regain mechanical consciousness. Bob now carried their weapons. "How long before they start searching for those two?" Bob considered. "That depends on their duty schedule. They function round the clock save for one 15-minute maintenance checkup per day." "What about periodic reporting in to some central security station?" "I don't know." Bob sounded helpless. "That's not the sort of information provided to a clerical robot. If they do send such reports, they could be due any time." "Then we have to move fast. I'd rather not risk provoking any more sentries, but we can't take the time to be diplomatic." He gestured back at the bulky desk concealing the incapacitated robots. "These two may already have been missed." "And so if he neglected his duty to the bureaucracy, it was to perform a higher duty," Durant was arguing strenuously. "I ask you once more, do you have any facts to support your macabre speculations? Granted, the man's an eccentric as well as a genius, but he's not the mad scientist of some second-rate horror play. He's willing and eager to share his knowledge with us." "So?" Holland continued to worry about Durant. His defense and praise of Reinhardt had turned from lavish to slavish. "So I won't allow you to rush us off this ship, Dan. And I won't give you any more time to see the light, Alex. We're leaving, all of us, together." Durant stared back at him. "That's really up to Dr. Reinhardt, isn't it?" No one had noticed McCrae. She was standing more than silently off to one side of the table. She was not withdrawn, nor was she daydreaming. She was working. The others continued to debate with facts, to argue without knowledge. "Dan?" Holland barely heard the ethereal murmur, but he recognized that tone of voice instantly, recognized also the faraway look on her face. So did Pizer, and Booth, and Durant. Conversation ceased. "What is it, Kate?" "Vincent wants you to meet him in the reception lounge near the Palomino right away. Also Mr. Pizer." Holland was already heading for the dining room door. To his relief, he found it unlocked. "Let's go, Charlie." Downing the last sip of wine in his goblet, Booth rose from his seat. "I think I'll tag along if you don't mind." They located the elevator leading downward. As he emerged into a familiar corridor, Holland put out a restraining arm, then edged back into the elevator cab to join his colleagues. "What's the trouble?" Pizer whispered. By way of reply, Holland gestured with a nod down the corridor. At the far end, they could see Maximilian and the probe robot disappearing around a far bend. Booth took a step in their direction, but Holland moved out to block his path. Now, Harry, that's not our party." "But the probe pilot," Booth protested. "If he's been to the event horizon and succeeded in returning, it means—" "To us, it means nothing. Not now. Let's move." Booth hesitated an instant, then nodded. They hurried toward the cylindrical tubeway and the air cars that could carry them quickly to the Palomino. Vincent was acutely aware of the weight of the laser weapons in his hands, but he kept them down. The sentry robots searching the nearby rooms were now moving away instead of toward him. "Let's hope they continue searching in the wrong direction," he said to old Bob. Both robots moved out of the concealing alcove and jetted up the corridor. Most of his audience had departed, but Durant was still full of words and arguments. McCrae had to bear the force of them alone. Her wide-eyed colleague was saying as he stared out the viewport at the black hole, "He stands to accomplish one of the final discoveries that has so far eluded mankind. Our knowledge of stellar physics has grown tremendously in the past couple of centuries, Kate, yet we still know nothing about the processes at work inside the event horizon of a black hole. We know little more than the first discoveries of the phenomenon. Reinhardt stands to fill in that blank in our knowledge. Or die in the attempt," McCrae said dryly. She paused a moment, regarded her friend with a mixture of concern and contempt. "I'm beginning to think you really do want to go with him, Alex. Do you want to die that badly?" "It's not a question of dying." "That's what Reinhardt kept saying. Alex, I like to think I'm as professional and curious as the next scientist, but when curiosity swamps your natural sense of self-preservation, there's something addled in your mental clock." Durant hardly seemed to hear her, enraptured as he was by the sight of the black hole and the vision of exploring its innermost secrets that Reinhardt had conjured up for them. "It could be the most fantastic achievement since the dawn of creation," he muttered, with fine lack of perspective. "Eric the Red, Columbus, Armstrong, Kiniyoshi. We could eclipse them all." The door opened and he broke off as Reinhardt entered. The commander of the Cygnus quickly surveyed the room, then spoke to McCrae. "Where are the others?" She saw no reason to lie. He might already know and be testing her. "Called back to our ship." For an instant, Reinhardt seemed confused. "There was no means of communication." "Ah, yes. The S-Link you share with the robot. Extraordinary. A technique which has developed after I left Earth. It was only a matter of time before biophysics matched the strides made by its inorganic counterparts. What seems to be wrong for your companions to be called away from their meal?" She shook her head. "Vincent didn't spell it out. Something having to do with the repairs, I'd guess. When you're working on something as sensitive as the atmospheric regeneration system using makeshift spare parts, you've got to expect some trouble. It's the kind of repair work that ought to be done in an orbital yard by qualified technicians. I'm not surprised they're having difficulties." "Let's hope they're solved quickly," Reinhardt said. "We're almost ready to embark on mankind's greatest journey of exploration. I'd rather not be delayed." Greatest, perhaps, she thought. Riskiest, for certain. She turned her gaze to the viewport. Reinhardt noted the look. "The danger is incidental when measured against the possibility of being the first to possess the great truths of the unknown, to learn perhaps the secret of mankind's oldest dream." "What truth are you pursuing inside the black hole, Doctor?" She frowned at him. "You seem to have something specific in mind. Does the bear actually have some idea of what he hopes to find on the other side of the mountain?" He smiled back at her. "Beyond the mountains, my dear. Beyond is a new beginning, a universe that may be suspended in time, where long-cherished laws of nature do not apply." "You live by the laws of nature. What if these prove inhospitable?" "I can learn to master new ones. I am prepared to cope with whatever I may discover, especially if I find what I hope to find." "Which is what?" Durant asked expectantly. "Eternal life. You know that time slows the nearer one travels to the core of a black hole? That seconds inside the event horizon can equal years on Earth?" "I see where you're leading, Doctor." McCrae tried to give the fantastic theory dispassionate consideration. "True, you could live 40 years in the hole while a millennium passes on Earth, but the 40 years would still be only 40 years, to you. They would not extend your real lifetime." "That is near the center of the hole, my dear. Once through the hole, I believe I may emerge into a universe indifferent to what we call normal time. where these 40 years will extend indefinitely. They may become 400 years or 4,000. There may be no upper limit if the aging process is effectively arrested. Life eternal. With no possibility of death. Doesn't that interest you? I find the prospect appalling. Reinhardt chose not to reply to that, and regarded her with what seemed a certain sadness. Holland and his companion stood nervously in the reception room, listening while old Bob poured out a longer version of the tale of deception and murder he had earlier related to Vincent. Occasionally, Pizer and Booth would interrupt the older machine's story with a question. For the most part, they listened in horrified silence. Vincent hovered nearby, his attention focused on the doorway leading back into the maze of corridors. And the officer the men trusted most was Frank McCrae, because he was a ship's officer as well as a scientist, Bob was saying. Kate's father. Pizer was fuming. They turned to him when Dr. Reinhardt ignored the orders to return home. They were prepared to take control of the sickness. That was when Dr. Reinhardt unleashed his own carefully prepared takeover, using the reprogrammed robots. He rationalized his actions by accusing the rest of the crew of planning to mutiny. A mutiny against science, he called it. Science and Reinhardt having become one and the same to his own mind. Dr. McCrae was killed early in the struggle. The sentry robots operating solely at Dr. Reinhardt's discretion quickly finished the others. The rebellion was soon over. Holland stood quietly with the others for a while, then finally asked the question to which he was afraid he already knew the answer. What became of the rest of the crew? The survivors are still on board. Where? Pizer wondered. Are they being held prisoners somewhere, that funeral Dan saw? No, Mr. Pizer. At least their bodies are not in prison. You've seen them yourselves in the command tower, running the power centers. The first officer looked uncertain, unwilling to make the final mental connection. Robots, Mr. Pizer, Vincent spoke brusquely. Humanoid robots. The most valuable thing in the universe, intelligent life, means nothing to Dr. Reinhardt, Bob went on remorselessly. To him, intelligence proves itself worthwhile only when it subordinates other interests to those of the greater good. By greater good, he came to believe it meant his personal interests and desires. The sickness contains an elaborate surgery. Once it served to to cure sick humans. Now it has been modified to program human beings to act like robots. They actually retain less individuality than such mechanicals as Vincent and myself. Without their wills, the crew became things Reinhardt could command. To me, they are neither machine nor man anymore, and less than either. Pizer looked sick. Holland turned to face the attentive reporter. That explains the funeral I barged into and the limping robot you saw. I was right about the object I watched being ejected from the ship. It was human, but so were the robot pallbearers. You mean there's a human body in those things? Booth looked stunned. I thought it was just that Reinhardt was looking to make his robots as human as possible. I didn't imagine it was the other way around. None of us did, Mr. Booth, said Vincent. Yet old Bob is telling only the truth. I saw myself the surgery in operation. Holland searched for something on which to vent his anger, something to break. He was frustrated by the sight of only seamless metal and unbreakable plastics. We can't just take off and leave those poor devils behind, he continued to eye the reporter. It looks like we'll have to try your plan to take over the Cygnus after all, Harry. It was comfortably cool in the reception area, but the reporter had suddenly begun to sweat. And risk acting up like the crew? If they couldn't pull it off, what chance do we have? What about our being heroes, Harry? Pizer was taunting him. Changed your mind mighty fast. Lay off, Charlie. I didn't think we'd have to fight a setup like this. I didn't know Reinhardt had managed to overcome the whole crew. I thought they'd abandoned ship like he told us. Taking on one man and one robot, okay, but not a programmed army. Robots set to guard are one thing, murder's another. Captain, Bob said gently, you would not be doing them a favor by returning them to Earth. The damage to their minds is irreversible. From what I've been able to observe and comprehend of the surgical process, it's possible their ability to respond individually might be restored, but they would be as mindless as newborn infants. Death is their only release. For God's sake, Dan, Booth protested, be sensible about this. We can't take on every robot on board. They already overcame a crew familiar with the ship. We wouldn't have a chance. He shuddered. We might even be taken alive. Regardless of results, said Vincent, events have been set in motion which require that we act quickly, no matter the course we finally decide upon. What events, Vincent? Holland asked him. I was forced to destroy 2 of the sentry robots. They discovered us while we were inside the surgery. Their counterparts are possibly searching the ship now. If the 2 I destroyed are found, the humanoid surgeons did not react to our presence, but it seems unlikely they did not record our appearance. If it is learned that we, and therefore through us you, know of the surgery and its function... Holland interrupted the robot. He had heard enough. Reinhardt couldn't let us return to Earth, Charlie. Get aboard the Palomino and prepare for liftoff. Vincent, get in touch with Kate and tell her I want her and Alex back here, ready to leave on the double. Vincent's lights twinkled in a particular pattern as they hurried toward the Palomino, indications that the S-blink was being engaged. Pizer hurried on ahead of him, and Booth let out a sigh, relieved that his initially daring, but now obviously foolhardy plan had been rejected. As a reporter, he had had occasion to live the life of the people he had been documenting. He did not, however, wish to sample the existence of a member of the Cygnus's altered crew. Within the command tower, Durant and McCrae looked on as Reinhardt guided the mechanicals there through various preparatory tasks. Lock in navigation on pre-programmed final course. Commence auxiliary inspection all systems. McCrae was standing before the vast screen on which the 3-dimensional image of the black hole was being projected. The gravitational maelstrom teased her scientific self. Emotionally, it terrified her. Meanwhile, Durant had strolled over to stand closer to Reinhardt. You've achieved all this on your own, Dr. Reinhardt. You'd have every right to reserve your coming expedition to yourself, to reject the request of a Johnny-come-lately. In quest of eternal youth, Alex? It was hard to tell if the commander was mocking him, but by now Durant was so far gone with worshipful admiration that he wouldn't have cared anyway. Scientific truth, Doctor. Alex, Reinhardt had been about to respond when McCrae's voice drew their attention. She stared blankly past them. Dan wants us back on board. They're ready to lift off. The commander eyed her speculatively for a moment, then turned back to his mechanical servants. Prepare engines. Stand by to build for maximum thrust. Commence maximum expansion of the null G field. Then, more loudly, Maximilian! Instantly, the huge mechanical joined them, floating out from nearby shadows. Within the cockpit of the Palomino, Vincent and Pizer finished checking out the ship's systems. How are your readings? Pizer asked his companion. All systems are go, the robot replied. Air regeneration is now working perfectly. Looks good. Damn it, Dan, Booth was arguing as he and Holland entered the cockpit. If we wait for Alex, we may be too late. I've seen the look in his eyes before, believe me. He's been hypnotized by that man. He's not one of us anymore. He's become an acolyte. Holland considered, then spoke to the robot. Vincent, tell Kate I want her back here fast, with or without Alex. What if she objects, sir? Holland's teeth were clenched as he spoke. Then tell her why I want her back.